You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Hey everybody, as your supply chain challenges continue, even into the new year, we're constantly having programming to try to help people think things through, especially around strategy, being more forward-thinking, less on the tactics, but more about holistic overviews of their supply chains and things they can be doing. And we recently hosted a webinar with Centric Software, they're a PLM supplier, where we focused and brought on two experts that really focus on how to sustain agility in your supply chain right now through challenges and uncertainty. We talk about those challenges that you know well, but there's some really interesting things happening in our industry and other industries to try to address kind of the strains that we see in the supply chain. So I'm going to tee it right up and we're going to go straight into the conversation. It is a webinar, so it is a bit long, but the length is important because we need depth of conversation around what's happening to think things through. Hopefully you get some key points and then I'll catch you on the way back. Hey, welcome everybody to today's special webinar. Thanks to our partners at Centric Software for helping support these webinars in the series and really bringing great value and great content to the industry and really bringing solutions and new ideas and best practices. We appreciate everybody attending today. I do want to let everybody know before we get started, we are recording this. So if for some reason you have to hop off, we all know how it is in this world today. You have to hop off early and you miss something, you can contact us at FDRA and we'll provide you the recording. Also, anyone who couldn't make it for the day, we'll send the recording out to them as well. And you can spread it around to your teams throughout your companies to make sure you have this really valuable content. So today we're talking a lot about the hottest topic in every single industry, in every single part of the world at this point right now, I think. But we're talking about supply chain challenges and uncertainty and how we build agility by using technology, specifically through PLM. And we'll also talk about other instances and other ways to think about how you build agility into your supply chain. So as we get started, first of all, I'm Andy Polk with FDRA. I think most people know me by all the many webinars and podcasts, et cetera, that we do at FDRA. But today we have two guest speakers, Matt and Colin, who are both experts around the footwear industry, around sourcing, around supply chains and solutions. Matt, I'll let you introduce yourself really quickly, but I think most people probably know you from your days at Crocs, as well as being on many of these webinars with us, providing solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And hello, everybody. I appreciate you attending today. As Andy said, this is a big topic. My name is Matt Knockery. I'm the sales director for Western North America for Centric Software. We are a PLM, I like to say the leading PLM solution in the globe right now. I've been with Centric about 7 years in this role, but prior to that, I was an operations director on the new product development side for Crocs. So I've tackled, feeding the supply chain and managing agility through technology, as Andy said, from both sides of the table. Starting with Excel and then moving into PLM and really hands-on experience doing it both ways. And of course, some time with Spider and Airwalk and Pacific Trail, a lot of brands under my belt. I've been around a while. So really looking forward to questions. If you want to type them into the chat, please do so. We love to answer questions. This is live. But that's it for me. I'll turn it over to Colin for his introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Israel. I have kind of a sordid past. Started out doing strategy and operations consulting for Deloitte for about 9 years, and then have been in the industry for probably the last 15 years in different functional roles. And most recently, about 2.5 years ago, we started Black Ink. And really what we do is we focus on supply chain, business transformation, and really looking for those efficiencies across your supply chain. And a big part of that, we are partnered with Centric to help with, system and system solutions kind of on the back end.
Awesome. So I'm really excited because the perspective that we'll have today when we talk about supply chains is not the typical perspective we have when we normally have our weekly calls or quarterly calls on supply chains, where you're hearing from port logistics people. These individuals are experts in their own right, and especially with product development, knowing that, and we'll talk a lot about that too, not just the supply chain, but the back end before you get to the supply chain and how things are shifting there inside brands, and some ideas and strategies, not just the tactics that we can get into. Before we get into that, I did want to give everybody updates on supply chain issues that we see really quickly to kind of tee up our conversation. This year, obviously, FDRA tracks a number of things, but we track imports in particular, and they're poised to rebound sharply in 2021 compared to 2020. We're almost going to be at record highs this year, which is crazy considering what we saw last year, but it speaks to the volume of what's coming into the country, not just in footwear, but most industries see this spike as well that's coming in. So you got every single industry trying to get product in, not just before the holidays, but all throughout the year and into the next year too, as we keep going. Right now, as we're tracking how many ships are stacked up, this is looking at LA and Long Beach ports. That's where the majority of footwear enters the United States. You can just see the number there where you would think, oh, well, it's getting a little bit better than what we have seen in the past because those are within 40 miles of the shore. It's going down. The problem is they changed the tiering system. And so actually, if you add in the ships that are coming in that are 40 miles out in a different tier, we're actually at close to 100 ships just off the coast trying to get in. And that's in addition to those stacks and stacks of containers that are trying to get out, and all the empty containers trying to get back into those ports. And then here again, if you look at it, you can see kind of what's happening, where it's at berth, where it's anchored, and where it's loitering. So the numbers are not getting better. Even the media may say that. It's actually still at its peak and maybe getting a little bit higher before we cool off, hopefully around Chinese New Year. Even we track the average waiting days. So as soon as they hit anchorage around that, it's days waiting to get in and get unloaded. And that keeps climbing. It's almost 20 days now around the ports, which is very concerning about getting that product off the ship as soon as you can and getting it into your warehouse or to your retail partners. And that is directly relating to why we see all these import charges that happen. So if you look at the freight cost, insurance costs, et cetera, about how much that spiked to historic highs year over year for those import charges for footwear and for other many goods and services. Some good news, I guess. The shipping costs, this is the Baltic Index. So we look at China and the Far East going into North American West Coast ports here. It's tapered off from the highs. It's starting to plateau a little bit, even as we see these numbers rise. So where it was in September, $20,000 is now around 15. So there is some price relief, but again, it's plateauing, which is concerning in and of itself. And then we take a look here at air freight. And I think what's happened around air freight is, as people realize how jammed up the ports are, they start looking for air freight. Air freight's challenges are completely different than the sea freight, but you don't have commercial airlines, which carry 75% of air cargo for businesses. So when you have a reduction in flights going back and forth from China to America or from Vietnam to Europe or to America, you start to see rate increases like this, especially when everybody starts to jump ship, I guess, and go to air freight. So your costs per kilogram is tracked globally is spiking quite high from Hong Kong into North America and Europe. So some challenges. And today we'll talk about some of these things, but COVID continues to be a real sore spot around our factories with shutdowns, with zero tolerance. We've also seen shutdowns because of energy issues in China around factories, around carbon emission, but also because of costs of the coal there. We've seen labor shortages at the factories, the warehouses, the truckers, both in China and Vietnam and in the US that's causing disruptions. We've seen weather issues that continue to plague different supply chains. Yesterday, I saw cyber issues where Amazon Web Services went down, which impacted Amazon. delivery services in certain parts of the country. So these are continually happening. And I guess part of what I want to point out here is these things in and of itself, obviously everybody's saying, well, this is the perfect storm. The supply chain challenges are not going away. There's always something new, whether it's President Trump with his tariffs or with, the port congestion that we're seeing, or with COVID, or this is a continual thing that we've seen for years and years. We just have never seen it all at once, but it doesn't mean that it's going to completely decouple and go back to one issue. There's probably going to be 5 or 6 issues that continue to plague us. And that's why this is a good way to tee up our discussion today. But we ask 100 CEOs every single quarter about their business, about their outlook for the shoe economy, for shoe shoppers, how their business is going to invest money, the cost, the prices, et cetera. And we ask this question every single quarter: what's your biggest issue of the next 6 months looking forward? And it's slowly ticked up. It was COVID at the start of the year, and COVID almost is a non-factor at this point, but supply chains now, 70% of CEOs now are the most concerned about supply chains over every other issue that's out there. And so that's why I think the discussion we have today is really important around mitigating those issues and looking at it from a different lens than traditionally we have looked at it. So as we go into this, and Matt and Colin, I'll just ask you right away, when you're talking to clients and they're bringing out these supply chain issues, and we just see that now C-suite folks are like pushing down really hard on the logistics folks and production folks and the development and design folks about, where do we trim time? What are you guys hearing in particular around these discussions? And how do you talk to them about, ideas and ways forward that, kind of spreading around best practices? Matt, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, and then I'm going to be really interested to get Colin's viewpoint on this too, because my viewpoint is a little bit, Colin's a big picture guy, and I'm a little bit more focused on product lifecycle management, selling the PLM solution. So, yeah, obviously I'm hearing the same thing. Supply chain is a issue. One nice change, I've been in this industry for a long time. Demand is not an issue for most people I talk about. There's plenty of people out there looking for what people are making right now, which I think a few years ago, you might have seen a different bar on that chart, right? Because, going back as far as like the recession of 2008, where people just weren't shopping, I'm not seeing that. We did see a little bit of that in 2020. So now it really is supply chain. And the number one way that we address it from the PLM side is, and I'm probably going to say this a lot today, it's with data accuracy and accessibility. You've got to have real-time data to make real-time decisions. So if you're deciding, hey, I've got 30,000 pairs of shoes, what's it going to cost me to put them on a plane? Is that going to pencil out to a smart business decision? Or do I get them in late, but I don't know how late because of the supply chain issue, and discount them later to make up the volume? I mean, you all know there's a million different pieces of that equation. So our attack to this problem is data, all the data, accurate data and real-time data, so that people can make accurate decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue is that, you can get the data from your shipper, you can get it from the port, you got all the data sitting around there and how you make sense of it. And Colin, when you see that, and you guys work with all the different companies and you see all these data points, how do you help them make sense of what's important and prioritize and pull things in?
And that's a huge piece of it. I mean, I think how you kind of sift through all the data. In many cases, the biggest problem people have now is kind of the data overload. I want to step back for a second though. And I think this is something that what we're seeing, I think there's something you said, Andy, that's really important, which is the current problem is the supply chain and the port congestion. And that's the problem today, but there's always some kind of problem, and I think especially with supply chain, it's always a big, even in other times, you still see it as a major issue for most CEOs and executives. So I think that the problem or the flavor of the day may change, but at the same time, there's still a problem. So I think that is important. I think what's been interesting for me as I'm looking at a lot of my different customers is it's a huge problem, no question, but it's also really allowing people to radically rethink how they approach their supply chain. And, kind of back to the data, I think part of radically rethinking is, we always have had kind of these batch calendar milestones, and we kind of go through this whole process, and we bring all of our products through the process at the same time. I think you're able to be more focused and kind of transform pieces of your business, accelerate, skip milestones for certain things. Maybe if you're just, for replenishment styles or refreshes, like you can do things that are a lot simpler and faster. So I'm seeing that as a strategy that a lot of companies are taking. And I think that really does kind of come back to the conversation that Matt had on how do you find data that's going to allow you to kind of drive those decisions. So, the decisions and obviously there's that voice of the customer focus is huge for everybody, and identifying data that helps you really kind of trigger on that, trigger on delays, trigger on quality issues. That's been a big thing. So I think really that the trick is just to get to critical action-oriented data as opposed to, getting bogged down and mired in the informational data. And that's something I actually, frankly, really like about PLM systems, is just that you can start to really focus on rolled up, aggregated data that then you drill down into specific areas where you have pain points is usually a good tactic.
Actually, Colin, you make a really good point there, because I hadn't thought about it until you put it in those terms. But I am seeing some of my existing customers divorce themselves from that batch mentality. So like you talked about, and in my past, it was always spring, summer, fall, winter, or back to school, holiday. I'm old enough, I even used to serve a cruise season. I don't think anybody does that anymore, but we used to, right? Used to have the 4 seasons. I'm seeing some customers now, you still have those milestone events. If you're, especially, my footwear background is Crocs. Back to school, it's no surprise. There's no trade secrets there. Back to school is huge for Crocs. But I'm seeing a lot of customers do that with specific styles for those milestones, but manage their evergreen styles, their continuous replenishment styles, more of on a modified as ready, for lack of a better word, time frame. So let's develop it. We've got a new fabric ready to go. Let's drop it in. I mean, if we think we've got demand for enough to fill a container, let's drop it in now. We don't have to wait for back to school. We can do it now, take it off everybody's plate, get it on the water, move on to the next problem. So, challenges like this drive opportunity. And I am seeing, and I didn't realize until you pointed it out that way, I am seeing customers do that because they're asking me, how do we change our process? How do we, click a couple buttons and make the process more evergreen?
Let's talk a little bit too, because I think part of the problem that we see now, and God bless all the logistic folks out there who are doing the Lord's work, but a lot of it's tactics right now, right? So it's like, do I bring it into this port or to that port? Do I air freight it in? So it's looking at the here and now challenges that we face, which are very important. But as I mentioned earlier, COVID doesn't seem, we have these new variants coming on, and the challenge of vaccinating a large portion of the Asian population with good vaccines that will, hopefully tamper down COVID for a while, but we may still see these disruptions happen, weather patterns, energy issues at factories, COVID with outbreaks keep happening. How do we at the same time we're having to execute these tactics, think strategically about this stuff too, right, going forward? And I know, Colin, you've done a lot of work with companies and thinking you're like, okay, I know you need to do today's work, but you got to think about you got to think about February's work too right now, because if you don't think strategically, you're going to keep bumping your head against this, and you're going to miss the opportunity to find a new way forward that will cut your cost, increase speed. Yeah,
unfortunately, I mean, I that's the hardest. That's everybody's nightmare, right? I think that transition from tactical to strategic sounds like this holy grail. I see the companies that do it successfully are relentless. I think that is part of it, is you have any change and any transformation is going to require some pain. But I do think there is, again, back to kind of the using and focusing and leveraging data, being able to think about those tactical triggers and what's causing you to have to do things that are tactical. How can you trigger those events quickly? And that's things like dashboards and things like that are more actively focusing people on the stuff they got to get done tactically quickly. I think that's important. I think looking at kind of the value and non-value adding tasks in a lot of those tactical steps is also important. We spent an inordinate amount of time waiting for emails to be read and received. And I think that's a classic one where, shoot, if we could just get rid of some of that, those tactical things are going to go a lot faster. So I think there is something to be said for kind of evaluating your tactical tasks, what you're really doing, what needs to happen, what the objectives are, and trying to streamline it, because that's how you free up time so that people don't get barraged as they try to think strategically. I think there are a lot of things that I'm seeing companies starting to do that are strategic with their sourcing priorities. Some of it's around sampling. Where do we move towards kind of a digital transformation? Where do we do things with 3D and digital samples as opposed to physical samples? That definitely slows things, or the physical samples, especially with the cost of air freight. I mean, they're more expensive. They're also slower. So people are definitely moving towards more digital first round of review. And that's been huge. I mean, I think that's actually where I'm seeing some huge leaps and bounds, is if you rethink where you need physical samples, that makes a huge difference. I could keep talking, but yeah, Matt.
That's exciting too. And I've got a customer, and I'm not going to name any names today, but they are pursuing the digital sample all the way up to first round fit samples, starting with fabric. So if you get the right scanners and the right software on the very beginning, you can start draping these fabrics over 3D models. And of course, toot our own horn, we're using Centric PLM as the backbone to tie all this together so that every user who's involved with product can see it at every stage of development in 3D. And, in my own past, if you can take 5 sample turns to get to a commercialized sample and turn it to 2, that's a lot of money. If you talk about FedEx charges, forget about mold costs and time and things like that. So, we are seeing a lot of that change being accelerated, first because of COVID and now because of the supply chain issue.
No, and I'm even seeing it with things like it's accelerating the merchandising discussions, which focus that activity downstream. So it's like, I'm not making as many photo samples and sales samples because I'm able to accelerate those merch discussions with 3D, and I don't have to wait until I'm downstream. It's reducing, fundamentally it reduces the sheer number of samples I need. And I think that's been pretty cool. Again, it's the pressures on the supply chain, the pressures on, port congestion are forcing people to kind of, in some cases initially settle for maybe second best, which would be digital. But I think what they're starting to see is that it's transforming into a new, better practice, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And we've seen too, obviously FDRA now runs Fannie Market Weeks, and we're taking the pulse of the industry, because typically you have 4 weeks of the year where people come and bring their samples for the forward-looking seasons. And we're inquiring right now whether February needs to happen or not, because the orders for winter already have to be in by January, right? Retailers are very nervous about product scarcity. And so earlier than ever, they're asking to see those samples and get those in. So then all of a sudden you get jammed up in another way, because instead of focusing tactically on your supply chain as the actual product coming in for spring and early winter 22, for February, March, April, May. Now you're having to also split your time by thinking about, late winter 22 and holiday season already. So I think that is, when we talk about digital, that's the relief valve that you can find and have that input across it, synchronize it. And now I see a lot of companies, particularly folks like Deckers and Wolverine and other people who are using those digital assets
Mm-hmm.
to get consumer feedback, not just the merchandiser feedback, but actually post it and get feedback in real time to tell them whether they're on trend or not, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge is like if you're making these shoes, if we're having to add 30 days development time and production time and maybe even 40, 45, depending on your product and where it is and where you're in the queue in the supply chain, just to make sure you get the product to your retailer on time and set expectations. Then you're saying, okay, I'm adding an extra 2 months almost to the retail. So your risk of hitting trend is greater than ever about missing the trend because of that. And I think that's a real issue, but being able to have everything centralized and see it and have all the specs in one place, your compliance team has it and all that. I think that's to Colin's point about getting rid of all of this wasted time and this busy work in order to be able to stop and have 20% of our time to think about 3 months from now, what's the transit time need to be 6 months from now? Because our factories are asking us too. Is this going to be normal? Is it going to change? How do I rate my prices? I guess the other thing too that's changing at the same time is the decisions aren't just about costing like they used to be. And that's one big thing that we've talked about in the past, but it's about material and resource availability. So you actually not just on the finished product, but in the material, the inputs going into the factories, it's more important than ever to have that. And I just don't think it's possible. Excel is probably one of the greatest human tools of history for productivity, but it's just not cutting it when you're not just looking at the supply chain to the US, but you're looking at the supply chain into the factory at the same time. Like how many spreadsheets do you need on your computer to be able to figure all that stuff out? So as we talk about that too, the switch in mentality of cost to availability, how do you guys see that? And what are you hearing about that as well?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Colin. I was, from the PLM perspective, that goes right back to our continual theme is that single source of truth. If you can give people a real-time dashboard that gives them all of that data, they can make those decisions. And one thing I've talked to several customers about is on your bill of materials, there are some materials that you would consider crucial to that style, right? It's that style is not that style without that particular material. There are other supporting materials, glues, aglets, things like that you can buy off the shelf. And knowing if you run into a supply chain issue on some of those things, hey, I can click a button and switch hook and loop tape from this guy to this guy, and no one's going to know the difference, and I'm not going to lose any time. It can take a lot of stress out, because in the old days when it was just Excel, if something was late, it was late. And then to Colin's point, you send the email, but they've gone home for the day. So now you have to wait till they answer it, or you stay in the office till 2 a.m. till you get an answer because it's that crucial. You can eliminate that. It's just real time. So I think that's how my customers are addressing that issue in particular.
Yeah, I feel like costing is not as much of a siloed discussion. So it used to be about material costing and things like that. And I think in a lot of cases, logistics, obviously there were expedite costs and things like that you had to consider, but today logistics is such an important element of cost. So I think it's actually changing your sourcing strategy quite a bit, because it makes sense to look at, do I do something in Latin America instead of Asia, or even domestically in the US instead of, offshore, period, because that logistics cost is so high. I think it's definitely kind of a multi-tenant decision matrix for sure, where you're looking at cost is obviously a critical component of it, and margin, but I do care about my voice of my customer. I care about quality. I care about sustainability. All those factors are also really important. I care about MOQ and on-time delivery and all those other things that start to come into play. And I think what's interesting is they get weighted differently at different times, but they're all still important. I think that's something that I would also kind of try to instill, is that all those smart things that you were doing about kind of thinking about strategic sourcing in 2019, don't forget all that stuff. I mean, yeah, we have some new headwinds and new things that are we're attacking, but those things are still important. And I guess that's something that I would just definitely flag is, yes, there's probably some short-term priorities, but we have to be careful not to change our whole supply chain strategy in reaction to something that hopefully isn't going to be permanent. Now, to that point, Andy, some of the things that you've mentioned, there will always be new headwinds, and the kind of the net effect is always going to be there.
I think it's interesting though to think about how we need to. I mean, especially like, years past, cost was all, if you have a dashboard and you got these different levers, cost is always like, oh, like that's, it's
Yeah.
draw it up. But like now to your point, we have to have traceability because of all these increased regulations from the government around Xinjiang and cotton and all that. We do have to have sustainability because our retail partners are asking about it. So all of a sudden you see these things starting to ramp up, and then your value pie around your product then starts to look a lot different than it used to. And it feels like because of all those data points, like Excel can't contain all that and give you a pie chart to say, are we hitting our value for our product for our customer or not? And you need something like a PLM that synchronizes all that data and gives you put what your values are around that, and it gives you, are you hitting your mark holistically versus just, one off in a meeting where like, where's the sustainability? Did we cover that? I don't know. Like, it becomes that conversation where everybody's synced up around that because you have your values and your culture in that built in, where your data feeds it in to say, are we hitting this mark or not for a customer? And I think it's a new idea or way to do it. And you can only do it through stuff like PLM.
Yeah. Excel to me, I mean, I love Excel, and I spend most of my day in Excel, unfortunately, but Excel is really like you're on a road trip and you have to stop to look at a paper map on the side of the road for an hour to figure out where you are to then start going again. I mean, by the time you put together that, you grab all the data from different locations and you put it into an Excel spreadsheet and you review it and you present it, the information is 2 weeks old. So that decision is gone. Or it's now whatever was kind of just something that would have been an early indicator of a problem is now kind of rip-roaring, glaring issue, and it's too late. So I think that is the thing with what we're seeing right now, just generally in supply chain, is you're having to move up schedules. That's a given. You're having to place orders earlier. You're having to make commitments earlier. You're having to kind of find time in different places, and you can't wait for an Excel spreadsheet to make that multi-tenant decision. You got to go fast. And that's a great point.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please.
But sharing a little bit about my own journey on this path. And we all know I spent a long time at Crocs, where I was managing new product development in Excel before I found out about PLM and implemented one. And it's a story I tell all the time, that in that role, I was doing weekly status reports, delivering them on Thursday afternoon, because that's how long it took me to pull the data together. So I would have people in Asia on their Monday, my Sunday, pulling data in Asia, putting it in an FTP site, pulling it down on Monday morning, spending the day writing macros and cleaning up Excel, and then spending the next 2 days creating charts so that everybody could see what they needed to see. And then on Thursday afternoon, get the various team leads together and make crucial, immediate, I'm using air quotes if you can't see me, decisions on week-old data. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. And that was the biggest benefit I saw from embracing the technology of PLM, is the week after we went live, I got 4 days of my week back. And I was no longer babysitting Excel. I was providing dashboards on Monday morning with real-time data to people who could make real decisions. And then you open the door to this holistic, kind of, Colin, what you were talking about, this holistic value chain decision making, where it's not just, well, I can see costing because I have that spreadsheet, so everything's based on costing now. It's, are we going to be on time? What customer is this for? What holiday is this for? Is it worth it to put it on a plane to make it for back to school? All those things can be done in real time and it kind of democratized. But you can't do that without the right technology backing you up. You just can't, no matter how good you are at Excel, you can't do it that way.
And folks, I'll remind you, if you have questions, as we have this continual discussion about technology and data and managing that, and thinking about the way we manage our operations a lot differently than the past because of this opportunity we have, because of all the chaos. Just drop it into the Q&A down below so we can see it, and we'll get to those. I'd like to ask you guys too, though, because I know sometimes when people hear like PLM, they start to cringe up a little bit. They think, oh, this is but I feel like PLM is not, I don't know if the saying still goes, but it's not your grandmother's PLM, right? Like today, the integrations that we have, the integrations we have, from what I've heard and seen, are so great that you can take all those Excels and actually get it in the system really quickly. What in terms of like onboarding and getting things set up, obviously people are like, it takes time. But I guess the message from the very beginning of this conversation is you don't have as much time as you think if you want to be strategic going forward. It's got to start yesterday in order to be able to talk about everything we've been talking about making better decisions and value-based decisions and executing. So Matt, what's the conversations around that with folks?
To quote Warren Miller, if you don't do it now, you're only going to be a year older when you do. It is change is hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. And just to speak for Centric, a typical Centric implementation is going to take about 6 months, but it doesn't take everybody in the organization 6 months. It takes a couple people fully focused and then multiple people focused from time to time. One of the real eye-opening exercises I do, and I encourage anyone who's considering not just PLM, but any kind of technological investment to do this, is to take a hard look, start by team, and then you can drill it down by person. What do you spend your time doing in a day? And one of the things I always ask prospective customers is, how much time do you spend looking for answers in your email? And I know that seems silly, and people typically say 15 minutes a day. Spoiler alert, it's a lot more than that, but 15 minutes, okay, that seems safe. Well, times 5, times 50 weeks of work a year, times the salary burden for that person, the time you spend digging in emails for old data that's no longer accurate becomes real money real quickly. And then you calculate that, or add on to that, how much time do we spend comparing Excel charts? Because you made it, but you sent it to me and I had to add some things. And I think, I accidentally deleted a column, but I'm pretty sure I added it back. So don't worry about it. I'm sure the formulas are fine. How much time do you waste doing that? I invariably, and again, I've been doing this actually 7 years this week. I've been working for Centric. I invariably find customers realize that their wasted time doing those activities generates enough ROI to justify PLM within a year. And for most IT projects, a 1-year ROI is phenomenal. It's not easy. I'm not going to say it is, but it's not forever. Speaking for ourselves, we've gone to great lengths to make Centric really easy to use. So not belittling Excel at all. It looks just like Excel. Get in, it's easy. Make the spreadsheets look just the way they used to. Difference is everyone sees it, not just you. Other big difference, the formulas are all the same for everyone in the company. So I also challenge anybody out there to talk to 6 different team leads in your company about how you calculate landed cost, and then get those 6 different calculations on paper and then get in a room and sort it out, because they're not the same. I've been through it too many times to believe they are. So all that value of eliminating guessing and getting everyone on the same page, obviously I'm a believer, it's well worth it. But I think all our customers would speak to that. And that's just where we are now. We've got, and this is not going to be a Centric pitch, although I could go for hours on this. You can do this with drawings on touch screens completely visually now. So the onboarding, there's no more, this is not your old AS400 ERP system. The onboarding doesn't have to be any harder than, here's your login, go do your job. There's some nuance, you'll pick it up. Everyone's smart, right? Everyone will figure it out. But the potential that we're seeing it's really just now being tapped.
Yeah, I spend obviously a lot of time in PLM too, and I like that Matt dated himself with the AS400 quote. But the reality is PLM has changed a lot, and I think there are certain things that I think are keys to getting a PLM in quickly. Kind of to Matt's point, I think you can find and focus your ROI on 2 or 3 different factors pretty quickly to justify why you want to do a PLM. And I think if you simplify and focus your attention in the initial phases on those certain factors, it can actually be pretty painless. I think also new PLM systems are or should be easier to implement. I think that you're starting to see more web-based technologies that are more configurable, that can be personalized very quickly without an army of programmers. And I think that is a huge difference. So you can be more nimble, and you can afford to make mistakes because you can shift and change and juke and jive later to fix things. So I think that's a big difference between old school PLM and kind of the new version. I think over a certain size and over a certain complexity with kind of that multi-tenant decision making, you need to have a PLM. And I think it does unlock a ton of potential. It unlocks a lot more responsiveness. And to Matt's point, the communication, moving that out of email and out of Excel spreadsheets into a system is just going to be a better strategy if you have to be faster.
We did have some questions come in. Again, I encourage folks to drop in some questions either into the chat box or into the Q&A. But someone was asking specifically about, having this central hub. You can plug in different vendors to this, right? So the information flows from your freight forwarder or from shipping, or, you could plug in Port of Long Beach data or any kind of data, right? The integrations are unlimited in terms of, I guess, even does it also connect even to like Salesforce or other kind of systems out there where you can track in that consumer data and at the same time track in your supply chain data?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
On the vendor side, the more vendors in your PLM, the better. And if you think about it in just day-to-day operations, you're asking vendors for quotes. They're typing things into Excel and then they're sending it to you via email, and you're taking that Excel and putting it in your own Excel. They should just be typing it into your PLM system. You've right there, you've eliminated 24 hours of back and forth and 2 chances for error. Just make them or ask them to do it in your own PLM system. As far as integrating with other systems, Andy, you're absolutely right. It's unlimited. I tend to caution people to pump the brakes just a little bit on that, because some things never change, garbage in, garbage out. So if you need to build those pipelines very carefully, make sure that the downstream system is getting exactly what it needs when it needs and nothing extra. But then, absolutely, you can integrate with anything you want. Just do it carefully. Great power brings great responsibility, right?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we've seen, and that's a great quote, Matt. It resonated with Andy for sure. There's a couple things that first of all, kind of when we think about PLM, we actually think of more the ecosystem, and the PLM system is part of that. But you might have a digital asset management system. You might have a PIM system. You've got your ERP is still going to play an important role, especially when you start getting into the supply chain logistics part. Like there is this broader ecosystem, and identifying and being able to integrate is important. To Matt's point, you want to be really kind of intentional and strategic about where you integrate. But then the other thing that we're seeing more and more is you kind of have this, it used to be called business intelligence. Now you've got machine learning and AI and all this other stuff, but that's really pulling information and that learning from a lot of different sources. So you really do need something that's pretty integratable, so that you can start to pull in those different, you can triangulate in on the truth by pulling from all these different sources. So that ends up being a really important shift. But yeah, I think to Matt's point, you want to be strategic about where those integrations happen, but they should happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we look at the future, and I feel like we're entering a new digital epoch in our history where, we had Web 1.0. I don't know what it is now, but it feels virtual now versus digital. We're when you have someone like Facebook changing their whole brand and their name into a meta universe, And people are making, people aren't really sure. I can assure you, if a multi-billion-dollar company is doubling down on it, something is going to come up with this, right? I don't know what the metaverse will become, but new technologies are going to flow out of this. And I think the problem for companies that don't have PLM and don't have systems built aren't going to be able to take advantage in the future. You have to have platforms to build upon and integrate within. And, you were talking about like machine learning, which I think is really interesting. And I was talking to somebody about how they're trying to get their PLM to function to where it helps them make a decision which factory makes what product based on where the raw material is, what the cost is, the quality of the factory, how fast they are, where the port is, where it gets shipped to, does it air freight it, and almost like synchronize it where the PLM gives them an answer, it spits it out, right? And it's like, it's this factory, you're using this port, this is your freight forwarder, this is the warehouse that it will go to, this is your delivery time, we factored in this amount of extra time in case there's some delay or something. But it's like gives you the decision and you take it or not, right? You're like, all right, I'll go with that. But the problem is it's like the same factory should do the same shoe. And it's like, well, that same factory's quality is not good as them and they already have the materials. Why would you do that? It makes no sense. And then it becomes the quote that I've hated, and I've told executives this right off the bat. The first person in your organization that says, because that's the way we've always done it, is the first person to go. I just don't like. So anyway, so I think the point is like to get to all that machine learning and to get to all these new things, especially that consumers are going to be engaging with. If you don't have a central point where all this data is flowing across your entire company and integrated in some way, it's not as simple as buying software to solve some of your problems here and there. Then you have a patchwork of problems, not a solution overall. And so I think it's a real challenge as we look forward. And that's why I was saying strategically, we're always going to have these problems. But if you're just looking at your tactics daily, you're going to miss this whole new virtual whatever that's happening that's going to forever change the new technologies, and you'll be scratching your head and way behind the eight ball at that point.
Yeah, something. Oh, Matt, I'm just going to jump. I'm going to interrupt you this time. Because something that you just said, and I think, Matt, you talked about it too, is the vendor collaboration piece. And what we're seeing increasingly is the collab, co-create methodology with vendors, where I'm actually pushing more of that development of the product design onto my vendors as kind of an extension of my team. And then again, you want that one system that allows you to kind of transition that out. I just had to throw that in because, Matt, I think that was something that you were talking about before.
And we see that all the time, right? And I often talk to our customers about tiering your vendors. Mm-hmm. And there are some that we consider part of the family. And that might be the vendor where you can call them up and say, hey, I got an idea for a shoe. Remember that one we did 2 years ago, but a little bit different? And they send you a sample, right? We love those vendors. Those are our A plus tier. And you tier them on down, where some people you don't even want them in the system, and that's fine. We need all kinds. But one thing that Andy said that struck a chord with me, any digital transformation, whether it's PLM or PIM or DAM or updating your ERP, I really think you're doing yourself a disservice if you think of it as a one and done activity. You really have to embrace a mindset of continuous improvement. And if you do that, there's no limit to what the future can bring. And this so-called metaverse is not going to stand still. So if you think, well, we already, we bought a PLM system 12 years ago and it was awesome. And it probably was. But if you haven't kept up with updates with, where the industry is going, you're probably not maximizing that investment.
I think too, in the ever evolving target, we talked about the value base of your footwear and looking at it completely differently. But sustainability and the scoring of your product, your materials, your certifications,
vendors,
asking for, you can't have a file folder with all that and spread around. You actually need something where you can click a button and push it up to your partners really quickly and know and have certainty around that from your other vendors flowing in and then flowing out, and you have line of sight on that. And I think that's the big challenge we have right now around our product in the marketplace is what's our sustainability standards? How do we communicate that to consumers? How do we tell that to our retail partners? And how do we make sure it's true? And it's not a bunch of smoke and mirrors, because there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there around that. One question that came in too was around currency conversion. So they're saying their vendors, whether it's the material supplier or they're paying shipping companies, or they're paying freight forwarders in different countries or their factories, they're all different, currencies. Does PLM help convert that and help manage that to where gives you good line of sight?
Short answer, yes. Longer answer, you need to do some work into, how are you doing that business right now? Are you buying futures? Are you setting a conversion date at some point in the calendar? Are you taking their word for it? Or is there a combination? So we've done all sorts of things to meet, even sometimes within the same customer, to meet those demands. We can integrate with a recognized conversion authority. OANDA is one that people like to integrate with. But whatever your corporate guidance is on that, if you're buying futures, we can pull from that. But yes, what PLM is not going to do is take that responsibility away from you. It's just going to make it easier.
Yeah, I think currency conversion, that's the easy part. That's just the translation. It's that futures and being able to recognize the future value of currencies is going to be, that's the tricky part. That's the whole, Deloitte used to have a whole they still do have a whole area that just focuses on how do you manage, different currency conversions, and that's a tough one. But
yeah, Colin, it's called Bitcoin. Let me tell you about this thing.
I think that's a different webinar.
Solves all your
perfect.
problems.
Cryptocurrency. We're all good.
Awesome.
Awesome.
I'm sure it'll be fully regulated sometime soon. Don't worry about it. As we kind of wrap up today, I want to thank you guys for your expertise and insights, and just kind of summarize some of the stuff that people are doing and looking at. A lot of the stuff that we focus on at FDRA on our weekly calls and working group calls are a lot about tactics. And we talked a lot about strategy today around, obviously, elongating your development timeframes and thinking about that more strategically. There's not a lot you can do right now once your product's on the boat, right? There's not a lot you can do. There's a lot you can do around managing your data and your wisdom to make better decisions ahead of time, to think things, I think, a little bit differently. And I think this conversation really brought out, like, what's our product value? How do we measure that? How do we think more strategically about where we make product, where we're shipping it to, why we're doing what we're doing, decreasing wasted time, which I think is a real business killer. So we think a lot about supply chains in terms of factory to boat to warehouse, when we should be thinking about email to Excel to Excel, right? That supply chain is the biggest killer. It's not so much the boat getting it in, if you really think about it, in terms of our business costs and time. I'm going to jot that down because I think that was really good.
That was good.
The Excel supply chain is more chaotic than it's ever been, and is worse than the port crisis. But as we wrap it today, Matt and Colin, I'll give you guys final word just to summarize or give us any final points that you can think about. And again, folks, we're recording this, and you can get the recording after the fact, and I'll pop up here the thank you slide so you can get the contact information for these great speakers. But guys, I'll give you guys the final word for the day.
From PLM, it's single source of truth. The sooner you start, the sooner you'll have it. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I think my final thing is that there's the recent headwinds have kind of uncovered a lot of things that have made people way more they force people to make change. And I think if we can capitalize on that and retain that change, I think there's some good things that have come out of it. So I think it's forced waste out of the system. If we can keep that waste out of the system, I think that's a good thing.
Great. Well, folks, again, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you get some takeaway around strategy and thinking about things a little bit differently. I think that's the value of these conversations that we have, is that point is we can't continue to do things like we've always done them. We've got to think about our product differently, our supply chain differently, and our workflows a lot differently. And we have to look at everything like that. It's not just one part at any one time in order to succeed. And even having a platform like a PLM to build for the future, be able to capture all the opportunities. And I mean, we talked a little bit about Meta Universe, but now I see a lot of stuff with Adobe and other people about designing in VR headsets and things like that. It's like, where does that data go? You know, your designer just spent a day in VR designing this really cool stuff, and it's really dynamic, and you can use it for a lot of stuff, but it's got to go somewhere. So even these things, as we keep going and moving down the road, you know, and I will say many of our members use Centric Software for their solutions for PLM. And we appreciate their support over the last several years and helping put on programs like this to help the industry. We really appreciate it. So if there's no other questions, we thank you for your time today, Matt and Colin. Really appreciate your time and your thoughts. And again, here's their contact information if you'd like to reach out to discuss any of these details, or you can contact me at FDRA, and I'm happy to put you in contact with them as well. But hopefully everybody will have a great day. Happy holidays. Please stay tuned. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., FDRA does a member update on what's happening with supply chains, on what's happening with the marketplace. So please stay close to us and let us know if we can do anything for you guys. Matt and Colin, thank you again very much. Really appreciate it. Okay, everybody, as you heard, you know, summed it up pretty well. You heard my voice and summing it up on the webinar, but there's some key things to keep in mind. Hope you enjoyed the conversation that we had around that. We'll continue to have these supply chain conversations. Go back to shoeandshow.com. We are actually asking executives about this as well. You can find episodes with Journey's president, episodes with BBC International's president on there about supply chains and consumer shifts. So go back to those conversations, and I think it behooves us to have multiple different discussions on this with different people to find different ways forward. And again, it's very important around strategy. These challenges are not going away. They're going to keep happening. And we've got to start to see them holistically and look forward instead of just a month ahead. We've got to see a year and 2 and 3 years ahead. So if we can ever help you at FDRA, please go to FDRA.org. Again, shoeandshow.com is the full website with all our episodes. Go back and check those out. But I hope you enjoyed this. And until next time, Shoe-In is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.